The blood on Josephine Wright's apron had long since dried to rust when her stepbrother Marcus shoved her toward the cast iron stove that summer evening in 1882, and she knew with absolute certainty that this time he meant to do more than just threaten. The kitchen of their ramshackle house on the outskirts of Montezuma, Colorado, was sweltering from the day's heat and the fire burning hot for dinner, and when her palms hit the stovetop, she screamed so loud the sound echoed off the mountains surrounding their isolated property. Marcus had been drinking since noon, furious that their father's will had left her a small portion of the silver mine earnings, and his patience with her existence had finally shattered completely. Josephine stumbled backward, cradling her hands against her chest as tears streamed down her face. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a searing agony that radiated from her palms up through her arms. She could smell the sickening scent of burned flesh, and when she dared to look down, the blisters were already forming across both hands, angry and red and weeping. "That will teach you to talk back to me," Marcus snarled, his words slurring together. He was 26 years old, 4 years her senior, and had always resented that his father had remarried when he was 10, bringing Josephine's mother into their home. When both parents had died in a mine collapse 2 years ago, Josephine had been left at Marcus's mercy, and that mercy had proven to be non-existent. She knew better than to stay. Through the haze of pain, survival instinct kicked in. Josephine ran from the kitchen, out the back door, and into the gathering dusk. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to get away before Marcus decided to inflict worse damage. Her hands throbbed with every heartbeat, and she could barely see through her tears as she stumbled down the rutted path that led away from the house. Montezuma was a mining town nestled high in the Rocky Mountains, over 10,000 feet above sea level, where summer nights grew cold the moment the sun disappeared behind the peaks. Josephine wore only her simple cotton dress and apron, no shawl, no coat, and her burned hands made it impossible to carry anything, even if she had thought to grab supplies. She walked blindly, following the main road toward town, hoping to reach the doctor's office before the pain overwhelmed her completely. She had made it perhaps a mile when her vision started to blur from more than just tears. The shock was setting in, and her legs felt increasingly unsteady beneath her. The road seemed to tilt and sway, and she knew she was going to fall before her knees actually buckled. But she never hit the ground. Strong arms caught her, and a deep voice said, "Whoa there, miss! I have got you." Josephine looked up into the face of a stranger, though stranger was perhaps too simple a word for the man who had materialized, seemingly from nowhere, to keep her from collapsing in the dirt. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were a striking green, filled with immediate concern as he took in her condition. He looked to be in his mid-20s with the weathered tan of someone who spent his life outdoors and the confident bearing of a man who could handle himself in any situation. "Your hands," he said, his voice sharp with alarm. "What happened to your hands?" "Please," Josephine managed to whisper. "I need the doctor in town. Town is 3 miles from here, and you are about to pass out. My camp is just off the road, maybe 200 yards. I have supplies there, and I know how to treat burns. Will you trust me?" Josephine had no real choice, and something in his steady gaze made her nod. He swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing, cradling her carefully against his chest. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, could smell leather and wood smoke, and something clean like pine soap. "I am Yates Young," he said as he carried her off the main road toward a stand of aspen trees. "I am a ranch hand, working my way north to Wyoming to meet up with a cattle drive. Been camping here a few days to let my horse rest before the mountain passes." "Josephine," she murmured. "Josephine Wright. Well, Miss Wright, you're going to be just fine. I promise you that." His camp was simple but well organized. A small fire burned in a ring of stones, with a coffee pot set to one side. His bedroll was spread near the fire, and his horse, a handsome buckskin gelding, was hobbled a short distance away, grazing contentedly. Yates set her down gently near the fire, positioning her so the light would let him see her injuries clearly. "Let me see your hands," he said quietly, kneeling in front of her. Josephine extended them, trembling. In the firelight, the burns looked even worse, blistered and raw. Yates's jaw tightened, and she saw a flash of anger in his eyes. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "My stepbrother. He pushed me into the stove. We had an argument about money." "Argument," Yates repeated flatly. "There is no argument in the world that justifies this." He stood and went to his saddlebags, pulling out a clean cloth and a small tin. "I am going to clean these burns and bandage them. It is going to hurt, and I am sorry for that, but we have got to keep them from getting infected." He worked with a gentle competence that surprised her. First, he poured cool water from his canteen over her hands, washing away the worst of the ash and dirt. Josephine bit her lip to keep from crying out, but tears still streamed down her cheeks. Yates glanced up at her face, his expression softening. "I know it hurts. You are doing real well. Just a little bit longer." From the tin, he scooped a pale ointment that smelled of herbs. "My mother taught me to make this. It has comfrey and calendula, good for burns and cuts. Kept me alive through more than a few injuries over the years." He applied the salve with infinite care, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he covered every inch of the burns. Then he tore long strips from a clean cotton shirt in his pack and began wrapping her hands with meticulous attention, making sure the bandages were snug enough to stay in place, but not so tight they would restrict blood flow. "There," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "That is the best I can do for now. How are you feeling?" "Better," Josephine admitted. The ointment had brought a cooling relief to the burning pain, making it bearable. "Thank you. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been here." "You would have figured something out. You strike me as the resourceful type." Yates studied her face in the firelight. "But you cannot go back to that house, not with your stepbrother there. Do you have anywhere else you can stay?" Josephine shook her head miserably. "No family. A few friends in town, but Marcus knows them all. He would find me." Yates was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically see him thinking through the problem. Finally, he said, "Here is what we are going to do. You are going to stay here at my camp tonight, and in the morning I will take you into town. We will talk to the sheriff about your stepbrother, and we will find you somewhere safe to stay. Your hands are going to take a couple of weeks to heal properly, and you are going to need help during that time." "I cannot ask you to do that," Josephine protested. "You said you need to get to Wyoming. The cattle drive does not leave for another 3 weeks. I have time." He smiled at her, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less serious. "Besides, my mother would never forgive me if I rode off and left an injured woman to fend for herself. She raised me better than that." Despite everything, Josephine found herself smiling back. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is, toughest woman in Texas, which is where I am from originally. She and my father have a ranch outside of San Antonio. I am the youngest of 5 boys, and she kept all of us in line without ever raising her voice. When she gave you that look, you knew you had better straighten up real quick." He stood and went to the fire, adding a few pieces of wood. "Are you hungry?" "I was about to make dinner when I heard you on the road." Josephine's stomach growled in response, and she realized she had not eaten since breakfast. "I am, but I cannot really use my hands. That is what I am here for." Yates pulled out a frying pan and set it over the fire, then retrieved a bundle wrapped in cloth from his supplies. "I have got bacon, beans, and some cornbread I bought in town yesterday. Nothing fancy, but it is filling." She watched as he cooked with the easy competence of someone who had been doing it for years. He sliced the bacon with a sharp knife, laid it in the pan, and soon the smell of it sizzling filled the air. While it cooked, he opened a can of beans and set them in a smaller pot at the edge of the fire to warm. He moved around the camp with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice, never wasting effort, always knowing exactly where everything was. How long have you been a ranch hand? Josephine asked. Since I was 14, started working my father's ranch, then hired out to other spreads to see more of the country and learn different ways of doing things. I have worked in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and now Colorado. Wyoming will be new territory for me. Do you like it? The traveling, I mean. Yates considered this as he turned the bacon. Yes and no. I like seeing new places, meeting new people, learning new skills, but I would be lying if I said I did not get lonely sometimes. It is a hard life, and you do not get to put down roots anywhere. Most of the other hands I have worked with either settle down eventually or they just keep drifting until they are old and broken and have nothing to show for their years. What do you want? Josephine asked. Eventually, I mean. He looked at her across the fire, and there was something in his eyes she could not quite read. A place of my own, some land, good grazing, a house that does not leak when it rains. Maybe a family, if I am lucky enough to find the right woman who would be willing to put up with a former drifter. The bacon was done, and he divided it between two tin plates, then spooned beans next to it and broke the cornbread into pieces. He brought one plate to Josephine, along with a fork. I'm going to have to feed you, he said matter-of-factly. No way around it with your hands like that. I know it is not exactly proper, but I figure circumstances call for practicality over protocol. Josephine felt her cheeks heat, but she was too hungry to protest. Yates sat down beside her and carefully speared a piece of bacon on the fork, bringing it to her lips. She took the bite, and it was delicious, salty, and crispy, and perfect. He fed her slowly, alternating between bacon, beans, and cornbread, making sure she had time to chew and swallow. There was something strangely intimate about it, having this near stranger care for her so tenderly, and Josephine found herself acutely aware of his closeness, the way his shoulder almost brushed hers, the concentration on his face as he made sure each bite was cool enough not to burn her mouth. Tell me about Montezuma, Yates said between bites of his own food. I have only been in town a couple of times to buy supplies. What is it like living here? Cold, Josephine said with a slight smile. Even in summer, you need a blanket at night. Winter is brutal. Snow can be 6 feet deep or more, and sometimes the passes close entirely, for weeks at a time. But it is beautiful too. The mountains, the way the light hits them at sunrise and sunset, the aspens turning gold in autumn, and the people are resilient. You have to be tough to make it up here. Your parents came here for the mining? My mother came here after my father died. When I was 12, she married Marcus's father about a year later. He owned shares in one of the silver mines, and for a while things were good. We had money, a nice house in town, but then the mine started having problems. Cave-ins, flooding, the vein running thin. He put everything he had into trying to save it, and it killed him and my mother both when that last collapse happened. I am sorry, Yates said quietly. That is a hard thing to lose both parents at once. It was. And then I was stuck with Marcus, who blamed me for his father spending money on my mother instead of only on him. Josephine looked down at her bandaged hands. Tonight was not the first time he hurt me, but it was the worst. I knew I had to leave, or next time he might kill me. Yates set down his plate, his jaw tight. Tomorrow, we are going to the sheriff first thing. Your stepbrother is going to answer for what he did. They finished eating in companionable silence, and then Yates cleaned up the dishes using sand from the creek bank to scour them. When he returned, he spread out an extra blanket he had near the fire. You take my bedroll tonight, he said. I will sleep on this blanket by the fire. If you need anything during the night, you just call out and I will be right here. I cannot take your bed, Josephine protested. Yes, you can, and you will. You are injured and you have had a terrible shock. You need proper rest. His tone left no room for argument. Come on, let me help you get settled. He guided her to the bedroll, which still held the warmth from the sun-heated ground beneath it. Josephine lay down awkwardly, trying to position her hands in a way that did not put pressure on the burns. Yates pulled a blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders with the same gentle care he had shown while bandaging her hands. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "You're safe here. I promise." And somehow, despite the pain and the fear and the strangeness of sleeping in a camp with a man she had met only an hour before, Josephine believed him. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the fire crackling, the horse moving nearby, and Yates settling onto his own blanket. The night was full of mountain sounds, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft rush of a creek she had not noticed before. And gradually, exhaustion pulled her down into sleep. She woke several times during the night, each time because the pain in her hands had flared up, and each time she found Yates still awake, sitting by the fire and watching over the camp. The second time she woke, he came over and carefully checked her bandages. "Still holding up well," he murmured. "Do you think you can drink some water?" He held his canteen to her lips and let her drink, the cool water soothing her dry throat. The third time she woke, just before dawn, she found him asleep finally, his back against a log, his hat tipped forward over his face. In the pale pre-dawn light, she studied him more closely than she had been able to before. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred and calloused from hard work, but she remembered how gentle they had been with her injuries. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that made her feel safer than she had felt in a very long time. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Yates stirred. He pushed his hat back and stretched, then noticed she was awake. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "How are your hands?" "They hurt, but not as bad as last night." "That is good. The salve is working. Let me make some coffee and get some breakfast together, and then we will head into town." He built up the fire and set the coffee pot to boil, then made a simple breakfast of more beans and the remaining cornbread. Once again, he fed her patiently, making sure she ate enough to keep her strength up. When they had finished, he saddled his horse and helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Josephine found herself sitting side saddle in front of him, his arms around her to hold the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. "Comfortable?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, though comfortable did not quite capture the confusing swirl of emotions she felt at being so close to him. The ride into Montezuma took about 40 minutes, following the winding mountain road that eventually opened up to reveal the town spread out in the valley below. Montezuma was not large, perhaps 200 permanent residents, but it bustled with activity. The main street was lined with businesses: a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a boarding house, a church, and the sheriff's office. Mine buildings dotted the surrounding hills, and the sound of stamp mills crushing ore echoed in the distance. Yates guided his horse directly to the sheriff's office and helped Josephine dismount before tying the buckskin to the hitching post. Inside, they found Sheriff Tom Caldwell, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Montezuma since before the silver boom. "Miss Wright," he said, looking surprised. "What brings you here so early? And who is your friend?" "Yates Young, sir," Yates said, extending his hand. "I found Miss Wright on the road last night, injured." Her stepbrother burned her hands deliberately by pushing her into a stove. The sheriff's expression darkened. "That true, Josephine?" "Yes, sir. Marcus was drunk, and he was angry about the money my father left me. He has been getting worse since our parents died, but last night he finally went too far. I ran, and Mr. Young found me before I collapsed. He bandaged my hands and let me stay at his camp." Sheriff Caldwell came around his desk to look at her hands more closely. Even through the bandages, he could see the extent of the injuries. "This is assault, plain and simple. I will ride out to your property and bring Marcus in. He will answer for this." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said. But I need your help with something else too. I cannot go back to that house, and I do not have anywhere else to stay. My hands are going to take weeks to heal, and I cannot work or care for myself properly during that time. The sheriff frowned, thinking. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might have room, but you would need to pay, and I know money is tight for you. What about the church? Yates suggested. Does the pastor have resources for people in need? Pastor Mitchell and his wife would help if they could, but they are already housing two families who lost their homes in the last mine disaster. They do not have room for anyone else. Josephine felt despair creeping in. She had nowhere to go, no way to support herself with her hands injured, and the thought of being dependent on charity made her feel sick. She can stay at my camp, Yates said suddenly. I have got supplies enough for two, and I can take care of her until her hands heal enough that she can manage on her own. Mr. Young, I cannot ask you to do that, Josephine protested. You are not asking. I am offering. He looked at the sheriff. Would that be acceptable, sir? I know it is not conventional, but these are not conventional circumstances. Sheriff Caldwell studied Yates for a long moment. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Young, but I do not know you. For all I know, you could have bad intentions toward Miss Wright. I understand your concern, sir, and I respect it, but I give you my word, as a man and a Christian, that I will treat Miss Wright with nothing but respect and propriety. I will care for her as I would my own sister until she is healed, and then I will help her find proper lodgings in town before I continue on my way north. He saved my life, Sheriff, Josephine said quietly. Without him, I would have collapsed on that road and possibly died from exposure or shock. I trust him, and I do not have any other options. The sheriff sighed. All right. But Miss Wright, you come into town every few days so I can see that you are well and that Mr. Young is keeping his word. And Mr. Young, if I hear even a whisper that you have treated her poorly, I will track you down myself. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Now let me go deal with Marcus Wright. The sheriff left, and Josephine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. One problem solved, at least. Marcus would face justice, and she would not have to live in fear of him anymore. Thank you, she said to Yates. Again, I seem to be saying that a lot. You do not need to thank me. I am just doing what is right. He smiled at her. Now, let us go to the general store and get some more supplies. If I am going to be cooking for two, I need to stock up. They spent the next hour in the store, with Yates carefully selecting flour, cornmeal, bacon, beans, coffee, and even some luxuries like sugar and dried apples. He also bought more bandaging material and the ingredients to make more of his salve. Josephine tried to keep track of how much he was spending on her behalf so she could pay him back someday, but he waved off her concerns. We will settle up later if you insist, but for now, just let me take care of things. As they were leaving the store, a woman's voice called out, Josephine, is that you? Josephine turned to see her friend Clara Shepherd, the daughter of the man who owned the general store. Clara was 21, petite with curly blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She hurried over, her expression concerned. What happened to your hands? Clara asked, then noticed Yates standing beside Josephine. And who is this? Josephine explained the situation, and Clara's face flushed with anger. Marcus did that? That monster. Oh, Josephine, I am so sorry. If I had known things were that bad, I would have insisted you stay with us. I know you would have, but Marcus would have caused trouble. It is better this way. Clara looked skeptically at Yates. No offense, sir, but this is highly irregular. A young woman staying at a bachelor's camp? People will talk. People will talk no matter what we do, Yates said calmly. But I assure you, my intentions are honorable. Miss Wright needs help, and I am in a position to provide it. That is all there is to it. Clara studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But Josephine, you come visit me as soon as your hands are better. I want to hear all about this. I will, I promise. They said their goodbyes, and Yates helped Josephine back onto his horse. The ride back to camp was quiet, with Josephine lost in thought. Her entire life had changed in the span of a single day. Yesterday morning, she had been trapped in a house with a violent stepbrother, living in fear. Now she was free of him, cared for by a kind stranger who asked nothing in return, and facing an uncertain but somehow hopeful future. When they reached the camp, Yates helped her down and got her settled by the fire. I am going to change your bandages and apply fresh salve. Then I will make us some lunch. The bandage change was painful, but Josephine gritted her teeth and endured it. The burns looked a little better in the daylight, the blisters less angry, and Yates seemed satisfied with their progress. You are healing well. No signs of infection, which is the main thing we have to watch for. Keep them clean and covered, and you should be fine. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Yates would wake at dawn, build up the fire, and make coffee. He would make breakfast and feed Josephine, then tend to his horse and check the camp. During the day, he would hunt or fish to supplement their supplies, or practice with his rope and his gun to keep his skills sharp. He would make lunch and dinner, always making sure Josephine had enough to eat. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Josephine learned that Yates was 25 years old, the youngest of 5 brothers who had all gone into different professions. One was a lawyer in Austin, one ran the family ranch, one was a Texas Ranger, and one had gone to California to try his luck in the gold fields. Yates had always been the wanderer, the one who wanted to see what lay beyond the next horizon. Do you think you will ever settle down? Josephine asked one evening as they watched the stars come out above the mountains. I think so, eventually, when I find the right place and the right reason to stop moving. He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. What about you? What do you want from life? I want to feel safe, Josephine said slowly. I want to have a home that is truly mine, where nobody can hurt me or make me feel like I do not belong. I want to do something useful with my life, maybe teach or run a shop. And someday, if I am very lucky, I want to find someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can give them. That does not seem like too much to ask, Yates said quietly. As the days passed, Josephine's hands slowly healed. The blisters began to dry out and form new skin underneath, and the pain receded to a dull ache. Yates changed the bandages twice a day, always careful and gentle, and gradually she regained some use of her fingers, though they were still stiff and sore. During the second week, Sheriff Caldwell rode out to check on them. He found Josephine sitting by the fire, reading aloud from a book while Yates cleaned fish he had caught in the creek. The scene was domestic and peaceful, and the sheriff looked relieved. Glad to see you are doing well, Miss Wright. Your hands healing up? Yes, sir. Mr. Young has been taking excellent care of me. I can see that. The sheriff dismounted and accepted a cup of coffee from Yates. Thought you would want to know that Marcus is in custody. He is going to stand trial for assault, and given the evidence and your testimony, he will likely spend some time in prison. In the meantime, your property is being looked after. I have got a deputy checking on it every few days. Thank you, Sheriff. What about the money from the mine shares? That is yours by law. Once Marcus is sentenced, you will have full control over it. Should be enough to live on for a while if you are careful. It was good news, but Josephine found herself feeling strangely melancholy about it. With money, she could rent a room in town, support herself while she looked for work. She would not need Yates's help anymore, which meant he would be free to continue on to Wyoming. The thought of him leaving made her chest feel tight. After the sheriff left, Yates seemed quieter than usual. They prepared dinner together, with Josephine able to help a little now that her hands were improving. She peeled potatoes slowly while he cut up the fish, and they worked in comfortable silence. You will be able to go back to town soon, Yates said finally. Once your hands are fully healed, you will have your money and your freedom. Yes, Josephine said. And you will be able to go to Wyoming for your cattle drive. Yes. Neither of them sounded happy about it. That night, Josephine could not sleep. She lay in the bedroll, staring up at the stars, thinking about the past 2 weeks. She had come to care for Yates in a way she had never cared for anyone before. He was kind and patient, strong but gentle, and he made her feel valued in a way Marcus never had. She loved the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the competent way he moved through the world. She loved talking to him by the fire, learning about his life, and sharing her own stories. She loved how safe she felt with him, how he never made her feel like a burden, even though she clearly was one. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Maybe she had been falling in love with him from the moment he caught her on that road. But what did he feel? He was kind to her, yes, but he was kind by nature. He had said he would care for her until she was healed, and he was a man of his word. That did not mean he had any romantic feelings for her. He had his own life, his own plans, and she was just a temporary complication. The thought made her throat tight with unshed tears. A few days later, Josephine's hands were well enough that she could manage most tasks on her own, though they were still tender, and the new skin was pink and shiny. Yates announced they should ride into town so the doctor could look at them and give his professional opinion. Dr. Ezra Thornton had been practicing medicine in Montezuma for 15 years, and he examined Josephine's hands with a critical eye. "Whoever treated these did an excellent job," he said. "The burns are healing cleanly, with minimal scarring. The herbal salve you used was very effective." "That was Mr. Young's doing," Josephine said. "He has been taking care of me since it happened." "Well, Mr. Young, you should consider becoming a doctor yourself. You clearly have the skill for it." Dr. Thornton looked at Josephine. "You should be fully healed in another week or two. The skin will remain sensitive for a while, and you will need to protect your hands from extreme heat or cold, but you should regain full function." It was good news, but again, Josephine felt that strange melancholy. Another week or two, and there would be no reason for her to stay at Yates's camp. No reason for him to stay in Montezuma. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, and Yates insisted on treating her to a proper meal. The dining room was filled with townspeople, and Josephine noticed the curious looks they attracted. A young woman and a handsome stranger, clearly comfortable with each other, sharing a meal. She knew what people were thinking, what they were probably saying, but she found she did not care. Let them talk. These past 2 weeks with Yates had been the happiest of her life, even with the pain of her injuries. After lunch, they walked along the main street, Yates leading his horse while Josephine pointed out the various businesses and told him stories about the town. They stopped at the church, where Pastor Mitchell and his wife expressed their relief at seeing Josephine safe and well. They stopped at the general store, where Clara pulled Josephine aside and whispered, "That man is in love with you, you know. The way he looks at you, it is plain as day." "Do not be silly," Josephine said, but her heart was pounding. "He's just being kind." "No man is that kind unless he has serious feelings. Trust me." As the afternoon wore on and they prepared to head back to camp, Josephine worked up the courage to ask Yates about his plans. "Your cattle drive must be starting soon. When do you need to leave?" Yates was quiet for a long moment. "Actually, I have been thinking about that. I sent a telegram to the trail boss a few days ago and told him I would not be joining the drive this year. I decided to stay in Colorado for a while longer." Josephine's heart leapt. "You did? Why?" He looked at her, his green eyes intense. "I think you know why, Josephine." But before she could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A man was shouting, and people were scattering. Josephine recognized the voice immediately, and her blood ran cold. Marcus. He had escaped custody somehow, and he was standing in the middle of the street with a rifle in his hands, his face red with rage. "Josephine!" he bellowed. "I know you are here. Come out so we can settle this properly." Yates immediately stepped in front of Josephine, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Sheriff Caldwell appeared from his office. his own gun drawn. Marcus Wright, you put that rifle down right now. You are making things worse for yourself. Worse? How can things get worse? You are going to put me in prison because of her. That ungrateful little witch cost me everything. You did this to yourself, Marcus, the sheriff said. Now put the gun down before someone gets hurt. But Marcus was beyond reason. He swung the rifle toward where Josephine and Yates stood, and time seemed to slow down. Josephine saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel pointing directly at her, and knew with absolute certainty that he meant to kill her. Then Yates moved. He drew his gun faster than she thought possible and fired once, the shot echoing off the buildings. Marcus's rifle discharged into the air as he fell backward, clutching his shoulder. The sheriff and two deputies rushed forward, disarming Marcus and dragging him away as he cursed and struggled. Yates holstered his gun and turned to Josephine, his face pale. "Are you all right?" She could not speak. She just nodded, trembling from the shock of how close she had come to dying. Yates pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her, and she buried her face in his shirt and tried not to fall apart completely. "You are safe," he murmured. "He cannot hurt you now. You are safe." The sheriff came over a few minutes later. "That was a hell of a shot, Mr. Young. You could have killed him, but you aimed for his shoulder. That took skill and restraint." "I did not want to kill him unless I had no other choice," Yates said. "But I was not going to let him hurt Josephine. Well, he is going away for a very long time now. Assault, escape from custody, attempted murder. He will be lucky if he ever sees the outside of a prison again." The sheriff looked at Josephine. "Are you all right, miss?" "I will be. Thanks to Mr. Young." They stayed in town that night, with the hotel owner offering Josephine a room free of charge out of sympathy for what she had been through. Yates took a room down the hall, and after she had cleaned up and changed into a borrowed dress from Clara, she found him sitting in the hotel's small parlor, staring into the fireplace. "May I join you?" she asked. "Of course." She sat beside him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Yates said, "I thought I was going to lose you today. When I saw that rifle pointing at you, I thought my heart was going to stop. But you saved me, again. You seem to be making a habit of that. Josephine, there is something I need to tell you." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "These past 2 weeks have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, taking care of you, talking with you every evening, it has made me realize something. I do not want to go to Wyoming. I do not want to keep drifting from place to place with no ties, no home. I want to stay here in Montezuma, if you will have me." "Yates, I do not understand." "I am in love with you, Josephine. I think I have been since that first night, when you trusted me to help you, even though you had no reason to. You are brave and kind and smart and beautiful, and I cannot imagine getting on my horse and riding away from you. So I am asking, no, I am begging, will you let me stay? Will you give me a chance to court you properly and see if you might feel the same way about me?" Tears were streaming down Josephine's face, but they were happy tears. "You do not have to beg, Yates. I am in love with you too. I have been so afraid that you would leave, that these 2 weeks were all we would have. The thought of losing you has been breaking my heart." He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Then I am not going anywhere. We will build a life here together if that is what you want. I have some money saved up from years of ranch work. We can buy some land, start small, build something that is ours. If you will marry me, Josephine Wright, I will spend the rest of my life making you happy and keeping you safe." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise, and Josephine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. After so much pain and fear, she had found something she never expected: true love, the kind that came along once in a lifetime if you were very lucky. They were married a month later in the little church in Montezuma, with Pastor Mitchell officiating and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Clara was Josephine's maid of honor, and Sheriff Caldwell stood up as Yates's best man. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Clara had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Yates had picked from the mountain meadows. Her hands, now fully healed except for faint scars across her palms, held tightly to his as they exchanged vows. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life," Yates said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to be your partner, your protector, and your best friend. I promise to build a life with you that is filled with joy and purpose, and to always make you feel safe and valued." "I promise to love you with all my heart," Josephine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings us. I promise to build a home with you that is filled with laughter and warmth, and to always believe in your dreams as you have believed in mine." When Pastor Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. Yates kissed his bride, and Josephine thought her heart would overflow with happiness. They had a reception in the church hall, with food contributed by half the town and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Yates whirled Josephine around the floor, both of them laughing, and she felt lighter than she had in years. All the darkness of her time with Marcus seemed like a distant nightmare, something that had happened to a different person. She was starting a new life now, with a man who loved her truly and deeply, and the future stretched out before them bright with possibility. Yates had used his savings and some of Josephine's money from the mine shares to buy a piece of land just outside of town, 20 acres, with good grazing and a creek running through it. They spent the summer building a house, working side by side, and by autumn they had a snug cabin with 2 rooms and a sturdy roof. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and Josephine loved every inch of it. Yates got work at one of the nearby ranches, earning wages while they built up their own small herd of cattle. Josephine took in sewing and helped at the general store when Clara's father needed extra hands. They worked hard, but they were happy. And every evening when they sat on their porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, Josephine thanked God for the twist of fate that had brought Yates into her life. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes, and Josephine never saw him again. She heard through the town gossip that he had become bitter and angry, blaming everyone but himself for his fate. She felt sorry for him in a distant way, but mostly she felt relieved that he could never hurt her again. The first winter in their cabin was hard. Snow piled up against the walls, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the bucket by the stove. But Yates kept the fire burning, and they would spend the long evenings wrapped in blankets, reading to each other or just talking about their plans for the spring. Josephine learned to cook on the wood stove without fear, with Yates always nearby to help if she needed it. The scars on her hands reminded her of how far she had come, from that terrible night when Marcus had hurt her to this warm, safe home with a man who would never raise a hand to her in anger. In the spring, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one morning over breakfast, and he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We are going to have a baby! Josephine, we are going to be parents!" "I know. Are you happy?" "Happy? I am the luckiest man alive." He was attentive throughout her pregnancy, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her wildflowers and little treats from town, talking to her growing belly, and telling their unborn child about all the adventures they would have. Josephine had never felt so loved, so cherished, and she knew with certainty that their child would grow up in a home filled with warmth and security. Their son was born in November of 1883, a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's green eyes. They named him Thomas after Yates's father, and Josephine thought her heart would burst when she saw Yates holding their baby for the first time, his face full of wonder and tenderness. "Hello, little man," Yates murmured. "Welcome to the world." Your mama and I have been waiting for you. Thomas grew into a happy, curious toddler who loved exploring the ranch and following his father around. When he was 2, Josephine gave birth to their daughter Sarah, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn determination. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. The ranch prospered as the years went by. Yates proved to be an excellent cattleman with a gift for breeding and training horses as well. They expanded their herd, built a barn and additional outbuildings, and hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Josephine started a small school in town, teaching the children of miners and ranchers, and found deep satisfaction in the work. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised her with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Clara, who now had 4 children of her own, and spent 3 glorious days exploring the growing city. Yates bought Josephine a beautiful silver necklace, and they attended a concert hall performance of Mozart. But the best part was simply being together, remembering the early days of their relationship and marveling at how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Josephine asked one evening as they sat in their hotel room overlooking the city. "Giving up your wandering life to settle down with me?" Yates pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Not for a single second. You and our children are the best things that ever happened to me. That life before, all that drifting, I was just searching for something without knowing what it was. And then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. You are my home, Josephine. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I love you so much. You saved me, you know. Not just that night on the road, but in every way that matters. You showed me what love is supposed to be, what a real partnership looks like. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "We saved each other," Yates said. "I was lost before I met you. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to put down roots. We built this life together, and I would not change a single thing about it." They returned to Montezuma refreshed and even more in love than before. The children greeted them with squeals of delight, and life returned to its pleasant rhythm of work and family and community. More years passed. Thomas grew into a tall, strapping young man who loved working the ranch and showed every sign of wanting to take over the operation someday. Sarah was bright and independent, with a passion for books and learning that reminded Yates of her mother. James discovered a talent for music and could often be found practicing the guitar Yates had bought him for his 12th birthday. When Josephine was 38, she gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Rose. By then, Thomas was 15, Sarah was 13, and James was 11, and they all doted on their baby sister. Rose was a happy, affectionate child who seemed to bring joy wherever she went. The ranch was now one of the most prosperous in the area, with over 200 head of cattle and a reputation for quality horses. Yates had expanded the house, adding on rooms as their family grew, until it was a sprawling, comfortable home that always seemed to be filled with laughter and activity. Josephine continued to teach, though she cut back her hours as Rose grew older, wanting to spend more time with her youngest while she still had the chance. She had become a respected figure in the community, known for her kindness and her intelligence, and she served on the school board and helped organize church events. Marcus had died in prison when Josephine was 32, and though she grieved for the waste of his life, she felt a sense of closure. She had long since forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger would have poisoned her own happiness. She had moved on, built a beautiful life, and refused to let his cruelty define her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the entire town threw them a party. The church hall was packed with friends and neighbors, all wanting to celebrate the couple who had become such an important part of the community. Sheriff Caldwell, now retired but still sharp, gave a toast. 20 years ago, I had my doubts about a drifter cowboy and an injured young woman starting a life together. But Yates and Josephine Young have proven me wrong in the best possible way. They have built not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that will last for generations. They have shown us what true love looks like, the kind that weathers any storm and only grows stronger with time. Here is to 20 more years, and many beyond that. Everyone raised their glasses, and Josephine felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. She looked at Yates, who was standing beside her with his arm around her waist, and saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. That night, after the party was over, and they had returned home to their sleeping children, they sat on their porch under the stars, just as they had done so many times before. "Thank you," Josephine said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For stopping on that road 20 years ago. For bandaging my hands and feeding me and taking care of me when I had nowhere else to go. For falling in love with me and building this life with me. For being the best husband and father I could ever have imagined." Yates took her hand, the one with the faint scars across the palm, and kissed it gently. "Those scars remind me of the night I found the greatest treasure of my life. I thank God for that night, even though it brought you pain, because it brought you to me. Everything good in my life stems from that moment. Our children, our home, our love, all of it started because I was in the right place at the right time to catch you when you fell. We caught each other," Josephine said, "and we have been holding on ever since." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a love that would last a lifetime. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over and gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah went to college in Denver and became a teacher like her mother, eventually returning to Montezuma to open her own school. James pursued his music, playing in saloons and dance halls across Colorado before settling in Denver with his wife and young son. Rose, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in the state to do so, and she took over care of the ranch's horses and cattle. Yates's hair turned silver, and Josephine developed laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. They slowed down as age crept up on them, handing more of the ranch work over to Thomas and his sons, but they never lost the connection that had formed that night so long ago when an injured woman and a wandering cowboy had found each other in the Colorado mountains. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Yates stood up to make a speech. His voice was not as strong as it once was, but it carried clearly through the crowded room. 40 years ago, I was a drifter with no roots and no real purpose. I thought I was happy, but I did not know what happiness was. Then I found a woman on a dark road, hurt and scared, and desperately in need of help. I thought I was saving her, but the truth is, she saved me. Josephine gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build something lasting. She gave me a family, a home, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge life has thrown at us. I am the luckiest man who ever lived, not because of money or success, but because I got to spend 40 years loving the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Here is to my wife, my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Josephine, every day with you has been a gift. There was not a dry eye in the room. Josephine stood and kissed her husband, and their family erupted in applause and cheers. That night, back in the bedroom they had shared for 4 decades, Josephine looked at the framed photograph on their dresser. It showed them on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing in front of the church with the mountains rising behind them. She thought about that scared 22-year-old girl who had run from her stepbrother's house with burned hands and no idea what the future held. She thought about the kind cowboy who had caught her when she fell and changed the course of her entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just remembering, marveling at how one terrible night turned into a lifetime of happiness. That is the way life works sometimes. The worst moments can lead to the best things, if we are brave enough to keep going and open enough to accept help when it comes. I am so glad you were there that night." Me too, my love, me too. They climbed into bed, and Josephine rested her head on Yates's shoulder, just as she had done thousands of times before. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, the most comforting sound in the world. She thought about their children, grown and happy, pursuing their own dreams. She thought about the ranch, thriving and prosperous, a legacy they would leave behind. She thought about the town they had helped build, the lives they had touched, the difference they had made. But mostly she thought about the man beside her, the man who had bandaged her hands and cooked for her and loved her with a devotion that had never wavered in 40 years. She thought about how lucky she was, how blessed to have found her soulmate in the midst of tragedy. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Yates murmured, kissing the top of her head. Always have, always will. They drifted off to sleep together, their hands intertwined, two lives woven so tightly together that they had become one story, one beautiful, improbable, perfect love story that had started on a dark road in the Colorado mountains and would last until their final breath and beyond. Years later, when Thomas was running the ranch with his own sons, he would tell his grandchildren about how their great-grandparents had met. He would tell them about the cruel stepbrother and the burned hands, about the cowboy who had appeared at just the right moment, about the love that had grown from kindness and care into something that had shaped an entire family's destiny. The most important thing, Thomas would always say, is that they chose each other every single day. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, an action, a commitment. Your great-grandfather chose to stop and help a stranger. Your great-grandmother chose to trust him. And every day after that, they chose each other, through good times and bad, through struggle and success. That is what real love looks like. That is the legacy they left us. And in the family cemetery on the hillside overlooking the ranch, two headstones stood side by side beneath a spreading cottonwood tree. The inscriptions were simple: Yates Young, 1857, 1928, beloved husband, father, and friend. Josephine Wright Young, 1860, 1930, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. But for those who knew their story, those simple words contained volumes. They spoke of courage and kindness, of second chances and new beginnings, of a love that had transformed two lonely people into a family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure for generations. And on summer evenings, when the light turned golden and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers down from the high meadows, you could almost see them there on the porch of the old house, a silver-haired cowboy and the woman he had loved for a lifetime, sitting side by side, hands clasped, watching the sun set behind the mountains and feeling grateful for every moment they had been given together. Their story had started with pain and fear, with burned hands and desperate flight. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. That kindness mattered. That love, true love, could heal any wound and overcome any obstacle. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. It was the story of how a cowboy saved a woman's life and how she saved his right back. It was the story of Yates and Josephine Young, and it was a love story for the ages.